I'll give you the short story. First of all, I live not too far from here, so I've been to Sagamore Hill with my family growing up, and always was interested in it. But what happened was I did a project for another national park called Ware Farm National Historic Site. It's in Connecticut, and I did a photographic collection of the interiors of the house of Julian Alden Weir. He's one of the founders of American Impressionism. So that collection was based on the house being pretty much empty because they were in the process of renovating it for the public. That collection was exhibited in Washington, D.C. through Senator Lieberman. It was exhibited in different venues around the country. That got circulated around the National Park Service. And so there was some interest here in having me do something similar for Sagamore Hill because it was also going to be closed for a time to be rehabilitated, as they say, do some structural renovations in the house. And so it was a prime opportunity to photograph the interiors of Sagamore Hill when it was pretty much empty. And it hasn't been seen that way except for when the Roosevelts moved in. And I think for a short period of time in the 50s, it was pretty much empty as they were preparing the house to turn it over to the National Park Service. So this was a unique time to photograph the house in a way that you're never going to see it again. And even though it's empty, so much of the personality of the president and also the first lady and the family and even the servants is revealed just by the structure of the house.
Well, take me through the first moments. You enter the home. Was it empty at that point?
Yeah, it was pretty much empty. I mean, the only thing that was in there were, there were still some trophy heads on the walls. They were on its way out. It was really kind of humorous because you see these big trophy heads, and then on the antlers there's like a little tag dangling from the antler indicating that it's on its way out. There was still some carpeting and some furnishing here and there, but if you've ever been to Sagamore Hill, it is a very well-packed house, let's just say. There's lots of memorabilia. There's rugs and trophies and paintings and all kinds of things. So even when there's stuff in there, remaining, it's pretty empty because that house just has a lot of contents in it. So, there were some workers coming in and out. There was some machinery. The fireplaces, most of them were in the process of being boarded up. So I wanted to get there early to make sure I photographed the fireplaces before they were covered. But it's unlike the way you would see it if you go on a tour. No velvet ropes. They gave me full access. I was able to enter the middle of the rooms, which gives you a totally different perspective on how it looks. I was able to get up close to some of the architectural details. So there's really a lot to see even when the furnishings are gone. And sometimes, in some ways, even more to see. Because when the furnishings are there, it's so overwhelming. You almost don't even know where to begin looking. Mm-hmm. And so you tend to look at the things that catch your eye the most, things that are very dramatic or very conspicuous. But there's a lot of subtlety just in the woodwork, just details in the moldings, even little evidences left behind by the family, wear and tear. There's for instance, a letter E was pointed out to me.
Yeah, you told me that story. Tell me that story. There's an E on a doorway.
Yeah, I love that. It was one of the first things that was my attention was drawn to, and I knew right away I wanted to photograph it. As you enter the library, and the library is very important here because the library, when it was used by TR during the summer, he conducted a lot of significant business of the country there. So, major labor disputes were discussed there with the Senate, plans for the Panama Canal, even negotiations with the Russians and the Japanese for a peace treaty were done through this telephonic diplomacy. That was the technology of the day, the telephone. But it was all done through the library. So it was a very important part of the house, and certainly I photographed it. But as you enter the library, to your left, if I remember correctly, on the door jamb, there's a little letter E that's just crudely scratched in there. And it was done by one of the boys, of course, there's always a boy. And the E stood for the sister Ethel. And the idea, I guess, was by scratching in the E, that the sister would get the blame, when in fact the boy did it. And I just thought that was wonderful because TR and his family, he's almost like a caricature. He's so larger than life. And as much as I wanted to photograph the importance of the president and the grandeur of the house, with the library and all these other rooms, I wanted to photograph and put as much detail or attention on that little detail, because I think it's something that humanizes him, and it's something that we can all connect with. I know growing up myself, of course I was an angel. I wouldn't dare do anything like that. My sister was a bad person, but growing up, as kids, we do those kinds of things. And so I think that anybody walking in, if they see that and know the story behind it, they can identify with it and connect. And it kind of humanizes them. It shows that they're just like everybody else. And again, it's just a little thing that you might not notice when you're doing a tour unless the ranger points it out to you, because you're going to focus on the big things. But there are lots of little things like that scattered throughout the house that I also wanted to put attention to.
And what were some of the surprising things that you found that the average person might not know about?
Well, again, I think a lot of it is just that human connection, because TR is so large. For a while, a very popular show was Downton Abbey, and I think that kind of sensitized people to the relationship between, the aristocracy and also the servants. So when I was, even though this was way before Downton Abbey, when I was in the house, I thought it was very interesting for me to see the rooms of the other members of the household, not just TR, but the other occupants. So this would be the First Lady, this would be the children, and yes, even the servants. They were all part of the household that made everything work. And so there are little rooms up on the third floor of the cook, for instance. Very small room, very simple, but nice to juxtapose it and compare it with, say, the North Room, which is TR's big room where he met all the dignitaries. And I just think that's just a nice contrast. It just gives you a different, different appreciation for the house. And even in those places, there are little markings by the family that for some reason just connects with me. It tends to be more with the kids. Up on the second floor, there's another room, the boys' room, also pointed out to me during my first visit here for the photos. And painted on the door says "door locked," And first of all, it's painted on there, It's a very beautiful door. I think it's mahogany, But it's painted on there in a kid's scrawl. It looks almost like the way honey is written on the pot by Winnie the Pooh. Kind of has that look to it. And that door was to warn another sister, basically to keep out, because the door is locked. And I know growing up that I did that kind of thing. I'd put up, I wouldn't paint it because my mother, I don't think, would go for that. But I would certainly take a piece of paper, write keep out or door locked or whatever, put it on the door, and that's a warning to everybody. So that remains to this day. That has not been removed or anything. It's there. And so I got a really clear shot of it because, again, it just kind of humanizes the family that, think about it. President Obama has, young kids in the White House. Jimmy Carter also had Amy Carter, young at the time. And so it's interesting to know that during this time period, everything going on in the country and the world, that you just had kids, living there with the father, just doing what kids do.
When we think about Teddy Roosevelt, we think about, as you say, the larger-than-life figure, the president, the Rough Rider, the man who gave a speech while he was shot and refused to stop speaking. This very tough man. What did you discover that might be surprising about Teddy Roosevelt, the family man?
Yeah, despite the rough exterior, he obviously had a great love for his wife and for his children. He had a lot of compassion. Even with the servants, it wasn't the sort of thing where he kind of lorded over the servants and was the master of the household or anything like that. From what I've read, he was, very compassionate towards them. When I do the photography, I don't just go in and start shooting. I usually do a lot of research beforehand about, the individual that I'm photographing or the house that it belongs to. And so he was pretty much a man of the people, despite his standing as a president and despite his machismo. He was a very humble guy. So I think that that's part of what visitors to Sagamore Hill, when it opens again after the structural rehabilitation is complete, I think that's what they're going to find when they visit there. This is just someone like them. Obviously, he wasn't like them in the set because he's president. But when it comes to the day-to-day things of wanting to spend time with family, you know, and all that, he really is not that much different. So there are many things we can identify with.
As an artist and a photographer, it's typical that you make a bond and a connection with your artwork. What did you come across and come out from Sagamore Hill with? Is there a piece of you in this work, and what did you find surprising?
Well, there's definitely a piece of me in the work because I spent very long days for about a week, so it's not as much time as people who work here and live with it. But it's quite a thing to walk into the room where TR died and be in the middle of that room, not away from it through a velvet rope, but to be there. It's towards the end of the day when it's kind of dark, and his deathbed is right there, and be able to photograph it, but also to kind of contemplate what happened. You know, that this person I've read about in the history books when I was growing up, that's where he spent his final moments. And to think that, you know, I'm right there in a sense in that presence. And so it gives you a different perspective on it. When you read something in history, I know when we do this as kids growing up or even in college, you know, there's a disconnect. It could be a little bit boring perhaps because it just seems like it's something that's out there, you know. But when you're in that room and you see that, then it comes to life and you just have a whole different perspective on it. And so I always remember that, just being there in that room and seeing the deathbed. And I guess it was also the time of day. It was just towards the end of the day, so it was kind of dark and I'm alone and it's very quiet. And it just gives you, you know, it was very poignant for me, I would say.
Tell me more about some of the surprises that you found. I know that there was a piece of wallpaper that you took a picture of.
Yes. At Sagamore Hill, there's a very large room called the North Room. And it's got very high ceilings. It's very macho. You know, it's got a lot of dark wood paneling. And it was meant to impress. This is where he would receive dignitaries and important visitors and heads of state and meet with them. So it was very large, lots of trophy heads, paintings, a very impressive room. And towards the back of the North Room, there's some wallpaper. It's original to the room. And I guess, you know, there's some damage, but towards the back part, it's in pretty good shape. So I knew that I wanted to photograph that because there's no way you can see that when you're on a tour. You know, when you go to the tour, you stand in front of the room, and then it goes way back, but you can't go into it. So you can only see it from afar. So I wanted to get shots of things that the average person will not see. So there was a little section of wallpaper that I decided to photograph, you know, up close. So it's basically a close shot. And from afar, you can see there's a nice pattern on the wallpaper, but you can't really tell what it is. It's just a pattern. It looks almost like ribbons. As I got real close to it and really started looking at it, you know, closely, then things started to emerge, different patterns. There's lots of patterns of leaves and, you know, it seems almost like pottery. But one thing that caught my eye was a section where these birds started to emerge out of the wallpaper. And they were peacocks, you know, very fluid and beautiful, and they were kind of turning towards each other, looking at one another, you know. So I took a shot just of those two peacocks because it kind of continues the pattern. I just took that shot. And I just assumed that everybody knew about it and was aware of it. But when I showed it around, a lot of folks said they hadn't noticed it before because, again, when you're just looking at it fast, it's just a pattern. And don't forget, when it's fully furnished, there's all kinds of stuff around it. There's Victrola, you know, record player. There's, as I mentioned, carpets and paintings and photos and furnishings. But when everything's cleared away, then things start to emerge. And it may take a while to see it. But it was a nice, clear shot of it. Again, the wallpaper there was in pretty good shape. And so I was very pleased that that's one of the things you can do with photography. You know, you can isolate something and exclude everything around it and draw the eye to something that maybe wasn't apparent before. And in particular, because as I mentioned during a tour, you just can't go in there and get that close to it.
I understand that there's a pretty unique intercom system in the house as well.
Yes. Yeah, nowadays, if I want to, my wife is upstairs, I can just text her on my iPhone, or I guess in our parents' day, it might have been, a radio intercom. But back in TR's day, the high-tech thing they had was literally a hole in the wall, with a tube. And then that tube just kind of dispersed throughout the house to different rooms. It also had holes. It's kind of like what they have in ships. And so if you wanted to call the attention of a servant downstairs, you would literally put your mouth up to the wall. There'd be an opening, kind of brass, and you would just speak into it. And it would just travel through these tubes, and they'd hear it, and they'd call back. So it's interesting that I think when you come here and you see that, it seems so primitive, but it works, And that's what they used back then. They also had telephones, as I mentioned earlier, when TR was negotiating the peace with the Russians and the Japanese. A lot of it was done by telephone, and that was a big thing for back then. The telephone was still relatively new. So to us, that may not seem like a big deal. We may think more of the internet, but in TR's day, he was high tech.
Anything else that you discovered that the average person wouldn't seem to know about on a tour, typical tour?
Yeah, I think another area that I photographed that I spent a lot of time in was up on the third floor. Up on the third floor, you have the eaves of the house, and so on the bottom there's like a cubby area, I guess, for lack of a better word. I opened the door, and inside are all these old trunks and luggage from the First Lady. And they're beautiful. They're all leather, just beautifully made. And what I loved about them was that they are all plastered with these very colorful, aged labels from all the places she's been to, like Cuba and just different places around the world. So I knew I had to get a picture of that because you can't get in there on a tour. In fact, I could barely get in there. I'm about 6'1", I think. And it took everything I could to get in there. And also, when you're working here, this place is literally a museum. So you can't touch anything. I can't touch anything. And you certainly don't want to lean on anything and possibly break it, And then, I have a camera, I have a tripod, and then there's me. So it was almost like playing Twister, to get in there and not touch anything, not lean on anything, get in there with my camera. It's pretty dark, so I had to bring in a light as well. And it took probably most of the afternoon to photograph that, again, without making contact with anything or moving anything around. So you just have to photograph it as it is. But I thought it was worth it because, again, if it was that difficult for me to see it, it's certainly going to be, impossible for the general public to see it. So I have a collection of photos of close-ups, of this luggage and the different labels. On some of the labels, you'll see the signature of the First Lady, real close. And I think when people see those photos, again, it just humanizes who these people are. It just makes it a lot more personal when you actually see the signature. It's about as close as you can get to that person. I mean, I guess it would be almost like going to Philadelphia and seeing the Declaration of Independence for the first time, and you see the actual signatures of John Hancock. Mm-hmm. And it just becomes larger than life because you see it all the time in advertising or in photos, but when you see the real thing, you just get a whole different sense of it. And that's the way I felt. When I saw this, it was almost like I was in her presence.
I assume when you first took on this project, at the very beginning, you had a certain perception of Sagamore Hill, the house, what your experiences were going to be. Did that change? And if so, how? I mean, what's the takeaway for you?
Yeah, I appreciate it a lot more than when I first came. I went a couple of times, I guess it was a long time ago with my family. And again, there's just so much to see. This is a very deep person with a very deep history. There's lots of layers to it. You can't get it all in one shot. This is the kind of place where you can come back every week for the summer if you want. And you're still just scratching the surface because there's always something new to see. So when I came and it was empty, you would think, well, what's there to see? It's an empty house. What's there to photograph? I'll probably do this in one day. But I was here for a whole week, and quite honestly, I could have been here a lot longer than that if I wanted to, because even when it's empty, it just reeks of TR. You know, you walk into his north room, and you know this is TR's place. You know, it's very strong, it's very masculine. And then you walk a few steps further into another room near it, and you come to Edith's room. That's his wife, the First Lady. And you know this is a woman's room. You know, it's very delicate, it's very airy and light, beautiful colors, kind of like a turquoise, you know. Beautiful fireplace with beautiful red tiles. And what a contrast to go from one room to the next. And so their personalities are embedded in that. And then, as I mentioned, you know, if you go upstairs to the kids' room, then you see just this, you know, this very commonplace situation with door locked. Okay, it's a mahogany door. I didn't have a mahogany door growing up, and I certainly wouldn't paint it. But that's just something every kid does. So those are things that, you know, kind of in a way, ironically, even though the house was pretty much empty, it kind of made TR more real to me. It was less of a museum showcase. It was more like a real house where real people lived. And you can see the wear and tear and the evidence of their presence, even in these empty rooms.
Having now completed this project, gone through the house, experienced all that you have experienced in this empty home, and documenting and soaking it in, what does the house say about the first family?
Oh, it says so much about them. It says that TR was a very important president in our nation's history. As you go through the house, you can see that you can see why he's known as the conservation president. You know, he was always very sensitive to the environment. Indeed, at the library of the house, he would meet with some of the early environmentalists. So that laid the groundwork for what probably really took hold in the 70s. And that's just the environmental side. I mean, TR basically doubled the number of national parks that we have in our country system. And if I remember correctly, to date, no president has even closely matched that. So that was really important. That's just on the conservation side. You know, then there's labor issues, even though, you know, folks sometimes think of Republicans as being not of the people, you know. TR was very much a man of the people and very sensitive to workers. And that was a big issue back then, you know, as we were still kind of getting into the Industrial Revolution. And there were a lot of issues about, you know, the workplace and working conditions. That was something TR was very sensitive to. He was a police commissioner in New York City early on in his career. And he would walk the streets of New York with a very well-known photographer at the time called Jacob Riis, after which Riis Park is named after. And, you know, Riis documented a lot of the living conditions of immigrants. And so, you know, TR was sensitive to that. But then there's also, you know, his wife. You know, you walk in and you can see that, I guess a lot like Michelle Obama, you know, she was the first lady, but she wasn't, you know, actively political, as maybe say Eleanor Roosevelt was. So she was more about, you know, looking after the kids in the household and making sure things are running right so that TR is free to do what he has to do as president. And then you have the kids. It was a very active house. You had 5 kids. So, you know, you have, you know, a pretty big family, and you have servants. You know, you have a cook. A lot of the servants were Irish immigrants. So again, you know, I think that also made TR aware of, you know, the working class. But it was a bustling household. Always people coming in and out, dignitaries, different people he would meet. And I think it's something that Long Islanders can be proud of, because Washington, of course, is, you know, where the nation's affairs takes place. But for a time, to escape the heat of Washington, since it's literally built on a swamp, you know, TR and his family came to Oyster Bay for the natural air conditioning that existed in this part of the country. And during those summers, you know, a lot of significant business was conducted right here. In fact, TR had initiated what was known as the Great White Fleet, you know, which was a naval fleet that circumnavigated the globe. And that was a pretty big deal in its time. They were actually anchored right off of Oyster Bay so that he can review them. And so I think that's a pretty incredible thing to think that right here in Oyster Bay you had this naval fleet. So, a lot happened here. And I think, I hope that through the photos that I've taken, which can all be seen on my website, they're on exhibit at Harvard and they're exhibited different places, that viewers might come away with a different perspective on the house, maybe even vicariously through the photos, experience and feel what I did. And I hope it'll encourage them to come visit Sagamore Hill. Even though the house is closed right now for the work that's being done, they can still see the grounds. The grounds are very beautiful here. There's also Old Orchard Museum, which is where we're at right now. There's a lot of TR memorabilia to be seen here. In fact, a lot of the artifacts from the house are on display here. And then you have the museum itself. Beautiful view of Oyster Bay. You have the preserve across the street, and then you can go into town and have something nice to eat with your family. So it makes for a great day.
You mentioned your website. You mentioned the exhibit at Harvard. I guess my question is, what's next? What happens to the photographs, the documentation that you did?
Yeah. Well, my goal. I'm inspired a lot by Ansel Adams. He was a photographer who did a lot of work for the national parks, and he helped draw attention to places like Yosemite, Grand Canyon, places like that. A lot of what I'm trying to do is sort of the same thing for a lot of parks that people don't often think about. The parks in the Northeast, in New York, Massachusetts, places like that. Maybe you're not going to see the kinds of things you'll see at the Grand Canyon. But we have something entirely different to offer. We have something that those locales don't have. And that's a really rich and deep history that goes back to the very foundings of the country. So for folks who are really into history and how we got to where we are today, these parks have that to offer, not just politically, but even in terms of art. I mentioned a Weir Farm National Historic Site in Connecticut. That's the homestead of Julian Alden Weir, who's one of the founders of American Impressionism. So it's important for people to know that art movement in the United States, has its center in our region. So what I've been doing is just trying to take these photos from Sagamore Hill and exhibit them in as many places as possible, because I think it's good for people to know about these parks, visit here. It's good for our local economy too. People come and then they frequent local merchants, so it's a win-win for everybody. I also want the public to continue to be vigilant in being aware of these parks, appreciating them, and making sure that they're properly conserved and funded. We're living in very tight times economically, and so we all have to tighten our belt. But there are some things that we have to be really careful with, like our history. The national parks for America is like what the cathedrals were or are for Europe. So, these are our cathedrals. These are things that are unique to our country, and we want to preserve them. So I think the photos help start and perpetuate that dialogue. So I'm going around as many parks as I can. I'm starting a project now for the Boston Harbor Islands, which a lot of people don't know about. When they think of Boston, they think of baked beans or the Red Sox or something like that. But a lot of people don't think of islands when they think of Boston. But in their harbors, they have about 32, 33 islands. They're very beautiful, lots of history. There are forts there. So they became aware of the work that I'm doing at Sagamore Hill, at the William Floyd Estate, and some other parks. And they asked me to photograph their parks and do the same thing. Just kind of, the photos become like ambassadors. I can't be everywhere, but my photos can be at Harvard, or they could be at another museum. I have some photos at the Long Island Museum right now from William Floyd and also Sagamore Hill. So they can be there. People can see them. People can visit my website also and see the photos. I have a free photo ebook from Sagamore Hill that people can download. And so once you have those photos, they're like feathers in the wind. You don't know where they end up. It can be anywhere in the world. And that's the beauty of today's technology, that you can have a worldwide reach. And that's a win-win for the parks, for our local economy, and for the artistic vision that I'm trying to get across.